Hello, listeners. Welcome to Happy Mind, Happy Lawyer podcast, a podcast which is dedicated to exploring work lives of lawyers. We are starting off with our ex-lawyer series. In each episode of this series, we sit down with a former lawyer who has taken the bold step of leaving law to pursue new and diverse career paths. We will delve into their stories, the challenges that they faced, the lessons learned, and the uncharted opportunities they discovered along the way. Whether you're a seasoned legal professional, wondering about a career change, or just curious about what lies beyond the courtroom of a law firm, this series offers valuable insights and guidance. Join us as we uncover the realities of making a career shift, the strategies for success, and how to navigate the uncertainties that come with change. I'm Kanika Kadam, your host for this podcast. I'm an organizational psychologist and a work coach at Happy Mind, Happy Lawyer, aka HMHL. And I've worked as a banking and finance lawyer for a long time. At Happy Mind, Happy Lawyer, our aim is to help people build happier work lives, whether it's within the legal profession or outside of it. We offer consulting and workshops to law firms and organizations on their organizational behavior issues and coaching and mentorship to individual lawyers for their work-related problems. In today's episode, we have with us Abhinav Srivastava, and he was a lawyer, and now he's working at a startup, and he's doing so many things at the startup. So he's doing strategy, operations, investments, as well as business development. So welcome, Abhinav, to the podcast, and thank you so much for agreeing to share your career journey with us here.
Thank you so much, Kanika, for the wonderful introduction. And I have to say that it's very nice to have sort of like a mini Khaitan reunion after several years.
Yes. So let's start off with your legal journey, right? So you graduated from National Law School, Delhi, I know. But why did you decide to get into law?
So, I mean, to be very honest, I am something that I call an accidental lawyer. It's not like, I ever set out to do law. I hadn't even actually considered it as some sort of a, professional option. The thing is that after 12th, like a lot of other kids, I was also very, very confused about what I wanted to do in life. My parents, as is the case with like most middle class people, pushed me towards IIT. And I mean, I slogged it off for, a couple of years, gave JEE. I got into like a very, you know, not so great IIT with like a biotech course, but I dropped out in like a single week because I think it just struck me that that was not really something that I wanted to do, and it was not something that I ever envisioned myself doing. And I actually wanted to study mathematics and economics at, some university abroad. So I spent a year giving my SATs along with all the subject tests. Got decent scores. I got into a couple of the colleges that I wanted to, but I didn't get enough scholarship to make it a, financially feasible possibility. And because of the fact that, my parents didn't really come from like, a very well-off background, that was something that could not happen. And my parents just like woke up one, day, and they told me that you've already wasted a year, you dropped out. And now, is high time that you decide what you want to do, because after this year, we will not keep you in our house. And I had a couple of friends who were doing law, a couple of friends from school. And the kind of picture that they painted about, law school was very different from what I found out once I got in. So I think I owe it to them. I think I got my financial aid results around, January of the year. And, in a couple of months, I had to take the IELTS and CLAT. And luckily, I got into, NLU Delhi, probably because I was having a good day on the day of the exam. And yeah, so I mean, I went into law school, but I have to be very honest that I did a lot of things in law school other than studying. Like I literally explored everything else but academics. And I think a large part of that was also the fact that I have a kind of mind that gravitates towards different things at the same time.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's eclectic or indecisive, but that is how it is. So yeah, and during my time in law school, I was also, like I told you, I was, very fascinated with mathematics and numbers. So I sat for like this thing called a valuations Olympiad where I got a decent rank. And after that, I was fairly certain that I didn't want to do law. So I went to EY to work for the derivatives team because of, the ranking in the valuations Olympiad and my affinity for mathematics.
Hmm.
I worked there for a few months. Then I thought, you know, I studied law, might as well give it a shot. Worked for a year at Ketan where we met.
Hmm.
And then, my life trajectory just went really, really berserk. And I explored a lot of things, which I hope we'll cover during the course of the podcast.
So tell me more about how was working in law like for you, and even working at E&Y, like right, because that was the first job that you did after graduating. So how were those experiences like for you?
So, okay, I don't think that I detested law or I hated law. Like, I hear a lot of lawyers talk about when they, say that they left law for something better. Is it better for my mental health? Probably, but I think, regardless of where you work, if you're someone who's very driven and like you have a certain set of goals, it does take, a certain amount of toll on your mental health, and you need to be very aware to, be able to regulate it. So that was not a concern. I mean, I'll start off with the negatives first.
Hmm.
So the thing that I didn't really like about law and consulting as well was the fact that, I didn't see accountability and, taking ownership for a particular thing as something that was applicable across the board. And that really, really annoyed me. The other thing was that, at least, based on what I saw in India, it could obviously be different for other jurisdictions and, perhaps a different metric there. But what I saw here was that, lawyers were very, very constrained in terms of like what they contributed to a deal. I was always fascinated by, how investments are made, how deals are structured, what are the economics behind a particular thing. So the role that lawyers played in India was almost very limited, and I wanted to be able to control the entire chain of the process that was happening, as opposed to just being someone who advises, a client on how to structure something, or, advises them how to get out of a sticky situation.
Hmm.
And I think the positives that I definitely noticed at Khaitan, which I think also contributed to me going into different roles later on, was the fact that I had a lot of, really nice and supportive seniors. I was probably not, I mean, you're obviously never like a finished product, but I had really supportive seniors. You were one of them, in fact, where, we worked on a couple of deals together. You were more than patient with me, and I really appreciated that. And what I really liked about most people around me was the fact that two things. Okay. Firstly, the fact that if we were getting into a deal, which was, let's say, in a particular sector, say petrochemicals or EV, it was never discouraged that you dive deep into the sector to understand the, metrics behind the sector, or like how the entire process works, or like what is the economic reality that is guiding that decision. And I think that is something that I always found very, very interesting. That, and the fact that even, during coffee breaks, whenever we would take breaks at Khaitan, I found like a lot of intellectually stimulating discussion happening with, associates, senior associates, PAs, everyone. And I think that was something that I really, really missed from, my time at law firms. Um, Other than that, I think during a certain part of my time at Khaitan, I realized that I wanted to do a lot more. And I also had certain entrepreneurial ambitions, which I don't think would have survived if I stayed in law. I also didn't see myself transitioning to, that partner track where you, let's say, get through a hoop of promotions and become a partner one day. And I've always been someone who kind of appreciates the idea of a polymath. Like I said, I'm very eclectic or indecisive based on how you look at it. So I like looking at different sort of disciplines and fields and trying to connect the dots there. So I thought, something that caters to that would probably be a better fit for my career. So I thought I'll take the plunge, because I think it's very, very important that you realize that at least in your early years, you have the most amount of freedom to take those risks. Because as you age, I mean, this will sound reductive, but as you age, the opportunity cost that you pay for, making decisions and for making transitions and starting from scratch grows exponentially.
So from what you were saying, you were looking to look at whatever work you were doing from a bigger perspective, not
Yeah,
the legal perspective. Like you want to
yeah.
probably be involved in deciding what needs to be done rather than, some other people deciding what needs to be done and coming to you and asking, can this be done legally or not?
Yeah, I think that's extremely accurate. Yeah. You've hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Okay. So, what was the moment where you decided, okay, this is it? Like now, it's really time to move out of law.
Right. So, okay, I don't think that I had, a particular aha or like a eureka moment during my time at law.
Hmm.
It was more of a gradual, slow burn
Hmm.
because I was also surrounded with, a couple of people. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by a couple of people that had that same sort of inkling as me, where they were like, maybe we should explore something that is beyond the realm of law. And I generally describe it as, you being able to slowly piece together, smaller bits of a puzzle and then realizing that this thing is not for me. So I feel like, and I think this is a metric that I've used for most roles that I've worked at and most places that I've worked at, that the moment that I stop feeling like that work is fun and it's, challenging me and pushing me, and it's something that I really, really enjoy, like the inner child in me that is always curious and wants to find out answers, enjoys, it's probably time to leave because, you can only explore if you continually refresh yourself. So it was not like I had a particular, really jarring experience during my time there. It was actually very, very smooth. Okay, not very smooth, but I think I'm also someone who has a pretty thick skin.
Hmm.
So most things that, come your way, I mean, I try to take it in my stride, but I think slowly I started realizing that, like you said, I wanted to understand like why we are doing that entire thing. So I was always more interested in the context of the deal as opposed to like making that deal itself. And this is something that I look back and realize now. But back then, I really wanted to be the one running the deal as opposed to being the one executing it.
So then, when you left law, what are the things that you got into? And I want to come to like the main area where you're working in space tech after this. But immediately when you left law,
Sure.
did you already have something in mind that okay, this is what I want to do, or you were
So,
open to exploring a bit more about trying to decide okay, where should I go next?
okay, I mean, I will admit one thing that, retrospectively, it makes like a lot of sense when you look back and, realize how it played out. But back then, I literally had no clue and I just wanted to essentially approach things with a trial and error method.
Hmm.
But then again, you also realize, I mean, like I said, I came from a family of limited means and I was the only child. So, there are certain amount of responsibilities that you also need to balance. So the amount of appetite that you have for taking risk is immediately halved, let's say,
Hmm.
as opposed to, someone who has the financial freedom for it. But before I, left Khaitan, like I told you, because of my time at EY and trading derivatives, I was always interested in, how the market works. I mean, I will also admit that I was silly enough to, make a couple of trades during my coffee breaks at Khaitan also. So I had like a couple of strategies that I wanted to see, and test out in the market. So immediately after Khaitan, I kind of like raised some money from my earlier bosses at EY, a couple of, family friends and people that I knew, and tried to run like a micro-sized fund that ran on like a quantitative algorithm. So you basically had like a certain amount of numerical factors that dictated when you enter a trade and when you exit it.
Hmm.
And the challenge there was, and I mean, okay, mind you, this is something that I did like 1 month before COVID hit. Okay. So most of the logic that I used to formulate that, which was based on historical precedents, kind of just went out of the window. The first couple of months, I made like a lot of money, probably, more than like I did in a month in Khaitan, but then like it also went downhill really, really quickly and I went into a lot of debt. The thing is that what I didn't realize back then was that what I wanted to do had a particular prerequisite that I lacked, which was a knowledge of coding. So I had to outsource it. And because I had to outsource it, I could not fix it every time it broke down.
Mm.
And that caused me a lot of losses. Eventually, I had to throw it out of the window, start trading by myself, and kind of earn back that money and pay everyone back, which was a very, very stressful time, if I'm being extremely blunt. But yeah, I mean, at least I salvaged the relationships that I had with people that, lent me their money. I said, this is around the time of COVID. So after I closed that, mini fund down, I had always also gravitated towards what you would call emerging tech. And I had a very strange interest in military and like defense tech. Might sound really silly, but as a child, I would, drop designs of fighter jets and battleships and like kind of break them down into smaller components. I know it sounds very, very nerdy, and I probably was a nerd of the highest order when I was a child, but it was always something that fascinated me. So, one of my friends told me that Invest India, which is kind of the investment promotion agency for India, they were looking for someone to work with the Ministry of Defense and DRDO and run a couple of programs for startups in the defense space and also get FDI into the country for defense. And my first reaction, I still remember when, I found that out, was that this is probably something that really aligns with a particular interest that I had as a child. And I was just so curious about, how like these weapons are actually made, what are the inner workings, and like what are the principles that are used to build them, or like how you flesh it out on a larger scale, that I didn't think twice before applying. And I ended up at Invest India, working for their defense sector team along with a fund that the Ministry of Defense ran called the Technology Development Fund, where we essentially tried to look at gaps that we had in the existing, armed forces and their capabilities in terms of tech, and then think what is the next step that we can take to ensure that they're future ready in terms of the kind of weapons or like, technology or counter strike capabilities that they have access to. And I stayed there also for a year. I think I left Invest India because I realized towards the end that working directly with the government all the time is probably not something that I am okay with. And I think that to a large part is dictated by the fact that I worked at, EY and Khaitan during the beginning of my career, which really meant that I was very, very used to, having things accelerate very quickly. So I mean, I was already an impatient person, getting out of law school after 5 years. And I think working in those high pressure, quick paced environments kind of exacerbated that. And my number one issue again with working with the government was that, I mean, your opinion and the kind of analysis that you brought to the table was really, really valued. But eventually, in terms of the decision making part, it's not really me that's taking that shot, right? It's always the government that's deciding what to fund. And it's perfectly fine. But I thought, I mean, so the logical next step after that was to think, okay, how can I do this on a private scale where I probably have slightly more decision making authority as opposed to this? Really like forward looking people and visionaries, I would say, in their path, that kind of were trying to build things that would not have been possible at that time for India. And one of those companies was Bellatrix, where I work now. And they were working in the space sector, which again was something that I was very fascinated by as a kid. I wanted to be an astronaut, and then I realized that I probably did not have the chops to like be one
It
of a
seems like you've
billion.
been living your childhood dreams.
Yeah, it actually does. I mean, I feel like, even when I recount these stories right now, the inner child in me is kind of like looking back and going like, okay, we at least accomplished small bits of it in some way or another. So, I mean, they were working in space, and, it was like something that I really, really found interesting. And I think at that point in time, because I was working with the government and I had a shoe in the door where I realized what was really happening and where the priorities were, I had an inkling that, the space sector was about to experience like sort of a boom moment for the country. And I reached out to these folks and I told them, I mean, I was like very upfront with them. I told them that, like I come from like a very I was background to say the least.
Hmm.
And I've never really stuck at a role for like more than a year. But I think this is something that I really, really find interesting. And, if you guys think that you can use someone of my skill set, I would love to, chat with you. And a couple of months later, I ended up joining Bellatrix and started working in the space sector. And so far, it's actually been very nice because, like I said, I really love understanding, the technology. I think to give you a bit of context, I work in something that's called a founder's office role, where basically there are two co-founders for the company, where one of them heads the technology development angle, and the other one is responsible for the commercialization and the ops end of it, right?
Okay.
I kind of act as the bridge. So to put it like very, very crudely, anything that they don't feel like doing or they don't want to do, that they don't think that they have the skill set for, that they think is more suited for me, or they think I can execute better, eventually comes down to me. And I think that also keeps it interesting because a big, big chunk of, my gripe with earlier places that I worked at was the fact that I would feel like I hit a plateau very, very soon.
Hmm.
That's not the case here because the work is very, very diverse. Like I could be looking at, the space policy and like recommending some changes to a draft one day. And the next day I could be sitting and, trying to understand like how electric propulsion works for, let's say, a 250 kg satellite or like calculating delta V. So all parts of me that had like very, very different disparate interests, all of them are being kind of tended to. So I
Hmm.
really enjoy that. And like I said, I have a fascination with space. Big plans for the sector, but I think only time will tell.
That's great. It sounds like you are really enjoying your work. I wanted to know more about how does your day-to-day work day look like at the founder's office? I know that you mentioned that there's a lot of things that you do and it's a lot of varied things as well. But generally, like how would a normal work day look like for you in space tech?
Oh boy, okay. I don't think there's like there's an accurate answer for this. I mean, if I had to give you a visual image of it, it's more like, firefighting. So you don't know which building is going to catch fire next. And you just like the moment you step in, you just like prepare yourself mentally that okay, like whatever comes my way, I'm just going to grab the fire extinguisher and try to deal with it.
Hmm.
I also have this, small kind of like inside joke where I say that my only skill set probably here, considering the fact that, I'm surrounded by people who are space systems engineers and rocket scientists and whatnot, is the fact that I'm the first one to reply to an email. So, like I said, there's no template to a day really. It's
Hmm.
more like whatever comes your way. For example, I could be, let's say, caught in a fundraising for a span of 5 months, right? Like from speaking to the investors to doing the due diligence to getting, all the stuff together to making financial projections or trying to basically break down the tech into terms that, someone from a financial pedigree that might not really understand, the intricacies of how the tech works,
Hmm.
boiling it down to easily consumable formats. It's very, very varied, right? So I mean, I could be doing like fundraising for 5 months, then I could just jump on to the fact that oh, there's a new draft of the space policy that's out that needs some of our suggestions. Or I could be at an event where I have to talk about what I see the evolution of the VC ecosystem in the space
Okay.
sector to be, to making like marketing collateral for the startup that I work at. So
Hmm.
it's very haphazard, but I think a part of me really enjoys that kind of chaos. It's controlled chaos in a sense, but it's something that keeps you on your foot, right? Like you know that when you come in, this day is not going to be like the last one. The moment I'm able to predict the next day is probably when I think I will start having second thoughts about doing anything. Yeah.
So it gives you a lot of opportunity to actually explore a lot of new things, which you mentioned that what you wanted to do initially in your jobs as well. That's great.
Yeah, that's actually on point because I think I spoke about this to, both of the co-founders also when I came in here. I mentioned this during the beginning of the podcast also that I am someone who, I mean, I at least feel like I have an entrepreneurial ambition. And I think something like this, a role like this, it steeps you in so many things that you eventually end up figuring out how to just get things done. So you are no longer just like, putting things on paper and strategizing. You just operate and execute. And it kind of gives you let's say, a less risky way of figuring out how to run your own thing. And I
Hmm.
think that's something that I'm very grateful for, because I mean, I hope that I'm able to utilize this to the maximum extent possible.
What is the best thing that you like about your current job?
Oh, okay. Okay, the thing that I really, really like about my current job, and I can't believe I'm saying this after, dropping out of engineering, is the fact that I get to learn about technology. I feel like, one of the things that all of us are also moving towards is just a future where technology is constantly being accelerated, right? Like, it's accelerating at a pace where none of us can keep up with the developments themselves. And I feel that, not just for me, I mean, I would say that for most prospective lawyers or currently practicing lawyers as well, is that they should try to steep themselves into technology as much as possible, because whether you like it or not, it is what is going to shape the future of humanity, right? And that's the facet that I really love the most here, is that I have kind of like a blank canvas to learn about stuff. So whenever, I have to work on something, I can tell you like a framework that I have. I always deep dive into the technology first, trying to like understand and break it down into smaller parts and, kind of wrap my head around. It takes me a little longer than usual. Like, let's say if I, really studied aerospace engineering or rocket science fundamentals, then it would probably be easy. But I think a lot of skill sets that law teaches you kind of also tie into how to learn new things, which I'm very, very grateful for. And that learning about technology and dissecting it and then trying to kind of forecast, even if incorrectly, as to what the impact of that technology is going to be, that is what I really, really like. Because I genuinely feel that the only way to improve lives of people is through, using that technology for good. I know it sounds very preachy and it's probably like very cliched, and you might have like 100 people in Silicon Valley saying the same thing, but that is the truth, right? I mean,
But that
we
is
are
the hope.
living. Yeah, I mean, that is the hope, given the fact that the regulation is able to keep pace, right? I mean, I have to add that caveat as a lawyer.
Hmm.
But I think as long as that is the case, I think all of us have been slightly better off in terms of how technology has impacted us. There have been negative effects, but I think that has been the outcome of the fact that we were not able to fill that regulatory gap in the right amount of time.
Were there any legal skills that you learned in law school or while you were working as a lawyer that helped you in all of the new roles that you worked in after law?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are three key things that we are probably taught as lawyers that we can use for every other kind of role out there. One is obviously being persuasive, or, having the skills for negotiation,
Hmm.
because I think that's something that's a very fundamental part of, law school as well as being a lawyer, right? If you've ever done a moot court, then you know how to get people into whatever idea you're trying to get across the board, or like get them on board with what you're telling them. And I think that's something that not a lot of other professions teach as a fundamental part of your skill set. Other than that, there are two other things that I think I always fall back on that I've learned in law school and during my time as a lawyer. One is obviously the fact that you think critically, regardless of whatever facts you're presented with. You always keep questioning until you dig down to the bare bones of it. It's also a part of being a pessimist, because I feel like during my time at law school as well as working as a lawyer, there were a couple of things that kind of seeped into my personal life that should not have. And one of them was being a very, very critical thinker and arguing with people. It has obviously come down a lot now that, I'm not doing it on a daily basis. But I think critical thinking, persuasion, and then definitely being analytical about whatever problem you're trying to deconstruct. I think those three are skill sets that I would not have picked up had I not studied law, practiced as a lawyer. But they are used almost every day in the kind of work that I do. If you want to add a fourth one to it, which I think is also somewhat of a character trait, then I would say curiosity. Because every time, we look up stuff, whether it's precedent or whether it's, a kind of permissibility for something that we want to do within the confines of law, It's always with a very curious mindset, right? Like you click at one case law, then you look at whatever argument you're trying to buttress, and then you find another case law, and then you keep going down that rabbit hole. I think that kind of curiosity is something that serves people very, very well, especially if you're working on something that has a certain amount of complexity to it, because you need to be able to ask questions no matter how it might seem to other people around you. And I think if you have that childlike curiosity alive in you, you can probably learn everything out there. And just continuous learning and evolution is very, very vital to every sort of role out there. That's my take on it, at least. Before I came to law school, at least, high school was very easy for me. I mean, I don't mean this to sound arrogant, but I
Mm.
think law school was a bit of a reality check where you realize that you really need to dig deep in order to understand what is really happening. And it was kind of an eye opener. So that definitely stoked that curiosity, because once you realize that you don't really understand, what is happening, then you don't have a recourse but to keep asking questions, right? Because you either want to wrap your head around it or you want to fail miserably. And I don't think any of us want to fail miserably. So the only thing you can do is just keep asking questions.
And what about skill gaps that you may have felt when you moved out of a career in law? Did you, take up any extra courses, or did you study on your own in order to meet those skill gaps? And I'm asking this, from the perspective again of somebody who is looking to go into any other career, right? So one is the legal
Right.
skill that will help you with any other career. And a lot of other lawyers have also expressed the same things that you mentioned about the analytical skills, the critical thinking, the negotiation skills, research skills. But I'm just thinking that how you actually bridge the gap for the skills that you may need in your new job and you don't have those right now, right? So what are the
Hmm.
steps that you took to actually meet that gap?
I mean, if I'm being brutally honest, I think I've also been lucky in the sense that I have always kind of gravitated towards things that might not really pertain to whatever role you're doing. So even right now, despite working in space tech, when I go home, or like, I take a break from work to take a stroll or do something else to pass my time, I will read stuff across, different disciplines. Like I could be reading about genetics one moment, or fluid mechanics the other moment, or how combinatorics work for mathematicians. I think one thing that I definitely noticed as a lawyer that transitioned into something else was the fact that I was not entirely comfortable with data, in the sense that I come from like a strong mathematical underpinning. But even then, just making sense of the kind of data that you would need for a commercial role is not something that law school or law firms really teach us. And the other thing would be that I wouldn't call it a skill gap per se. It's more of a perception problem, where I feel like not a lot of precedence has been set for lawyers to do other things, at least in India. I mean, if you look at, let's say, the United States or UK, right, you'll find a lot of lawyers who are probably doing venture capital or private equity. There are, in fact, a lot of hedge funds in the US which work with distressed companies that hire lawyers with a very specialized focus, right?
Mm,
So, having those alternate career paths in those economies is much easier for a lawyer, as opposed to that being a possibility in India. And I think that's both a problem for the people around us as well as for us. So I mean, to kind of jog my memory back to when I wanted to transition to something different, it
mm,
was really, really difficult to find someone who had a similar path, right? I mean, you could definitely see lawyers doing work in allied fields, like, let's say, consulting or non-profit public policy work,
mm,
right? But it's very, very difficult to find lawyers who would be doing venture capital right now. I mean, I know a bunch of folks from VC, and I can tell you there are, at best, I know like three lawyers that work as VCs right now. And I think that possibility needs to be opened up, because we need to realize that eventually it's not really what you study in law school, right? I mean, speaking only for myself, I feel like what I was taught in law school and how law firms actually functioned and what you had to do, there was a massive gap there, right? And I think the first few months of you working in a law firm, I just spent trying to wrap your head around as to how you apply what you were taught to this particular place. I could be a slow learner, or, I could just perhaps was not as interested in law as the other people around me. But that's what I felt. But yeah, I think bridging the scale gap is not really that difficult if you just stay curious, right? And we live in a time where literally every information out there is accessible. You just need to look for it, think with, a curious mind, and just keep trying to like dig deep. I think if you break stuff down to the fundamentals, then it's not that difficult to understand stuff, right? Because access to knowledge is not really a barrier per se anymore. I always come in with the mindset that even if you don't do anything with that information, it's probably something that might help you later on, right? Especially in today's time, I think people get too lost in the fact that there should be some amount of specialization in something. Because if I have to give you, examples, recall the Renaissance period, right? Like you had most of the people that were prominent and that really made a dent as to whether it's culture or art or, just engineering, anything. You think of people and they were all blessed with an understanding of different skill sets, because I think that is the only way to unlock solutions that have evaded us, right? Like you take one approach from a particular field and you try to use it in another one.
I love that you say that. And that's also, I think, something that's mentioned in your LinkedIn bio as well. So something about learning being a power. And, learning is also one of my like top values. So I completely agree with whatever you're saying because, that inner desire to just keep learning whatever it is that you want to learn. I think that in itself lets you learn a lot more skills that you may not know that that is going to be of use to you right now, but down the line eventually all those skills come together to be useful to you.
Yeah, certainly. Because I mean, if you think about it, eventually, they have a saying in physics that entropy is the ultimate nullifier. It's the truth of the universe, right? Like that things decay. And I feel like if you don't continuously learn, the only way to escape entropy is to accelerate yourself, right? And one of the ways to accelerate yourself is to ensure that you keep learning. It's another thing that you should learn something that, interests you and that has a possible real world utility. And it should not just be, something that you just like keep in your mind and not apply ever again. But yeah, definitely learning is the way to go forward. Otherwise, you just get stuck in that rut where things don't move ahead and you kind of just feel like every day is monotonous. And I don't really remember my LinkedIn bio because I feel like I would have written it like a couple of years ago.
Mm,
But I'm sure it's there. I do believe in the fact that um, evolution is the only way that we should aspire to live. Find purpose in whatever interests you and whatever you gravitate towards. Wow, this sounded a lot more preachy than I thought it would.
no, but that's good advice. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. What were the major fears and challenges and uncertainties that you had to go through when you were doing this career transition? And I mean
Oh,
this,
wow.
mentally as well as financially, like in all aspects.
So I think, okay, I will preface this with one thing. Initially, because of the fact that I've had so many transitions and I've started from zero at like every point. After the first time that I did it, I actually thought that it would be so much more easier because, I've already done it once and, how bad can it be?
Uh,
But it is surprisingly, it's equally hard each time because I think there are two facets to it, right? One is the fact that you kind of feel like, and I used to feel this way a lot. At every point of transition, I felt this that I have literally devoted, like, let's say, at least an year to this particular endeavor, and it's not, it hasn't resonated with me, and it doesn't feel like it's something that I'm really, really invested in or I want to do.
hmm,
So that opportunity cost is something that you need to be willing to pay, and it's very difficult to convince yourself to pay it.
Mm.
But I think once you do that, then the other challenge is getting the people around you on board. I didn't feel that way because I think even when I was a child, I was a little anti-authoritarian in a lot of ways. So I've not really believed in sticking to conventional wisdom per se. But there's definitely that facet of, what will people around me say, right? And I think if not that, then you are bound to look at other people from your batch or from, the same kind of timeline or skill set and think, hey, they made like so much progress, but I did not.
Mm.
Like, let's say a particular friend of mine made PA, but I'm still doing this, trying to figure out where I fit in. But I don't think you should really look at it that way. I think you should just consider the fact that remaining static itself has an opportunity cost, right? Like not taking risk is also an opportunity cost that you're kind of numbing yourself to, knowing full well that it's not something that you want to do. The bigger challenges for me, personally speaking, one was obviously the fact that because my parents were financially dependent on me, that was a massive, massive mental block because suddenly it's not just about you figuring out stuff for yourself. You also realize that there are two other people or two other lives that are dependent on you, and that's why I said in the beginning that as you age, the kind of risk appetite that you have kind really really grows down because you realize that you are trading away a lot for every kind of risk that you're taking. Luckily I was fortunate enough to make those transitions early on in my career. But the other thing that I kind of hated was, a lot of people would question you, especially in my case, because I dropped out of engineering, then I did law. I didn't really do law because I kept gravitating into different fields. So while it's possible to block out other people from, whatever their opinion is, I think eventually it does kind of like leave a chink in your armor where you begin to doubt yourself as to whether you're making the right decision or not. And then I think the third thing which I touched upon like earlier was the fact that again, like no one really to guide you, right? Like no mentor sort of figure, because I think someone else providing you that clarity is also very very helpful, because then you don't really need to commit the same mistakes or reinvent the wheel all over again. So I think those were my biggest challenges. But I think how I approached it, and I've kind of used this as a heuristic or like a razor, if you want to call it, every time I wanted to transition, is that you think of the adjacent possible, right? So as you push the frontiers of what you know and what you experiment with, the space that you don't know and that you haven't experimented with will also continue to grow, right? But what that does for you is that it makes the next step possible. So don't think of like making a quantum leap and like let's say going from 0 to 100 in one go, but think long term and think of like smaller steps that you can take that slowly and slowly like nudge you towards the end of the board. And I think that has kind of helped me, because otherwise I would not have landed up in space tech, even if I really, really wanted to. So I think it was in some ways necessary for me to tank my fund, then, work with DRDO, and then slowly expand the adjacent frontier to something like space tech and then move here. Right. So that's something that I often find myself referring to. And then there's another, given the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty that is involved in a transition period, right?
Mm.
You, I forget who it was, but someone coined the concept of Nishian uncertainty, which is essentially uncertainty that you can't really factor into a model or you can't model mathematically, that goes beyond the logic of probability or, determinism.
Mm.
And I believe that instead of, being bogged down by that fear, you should use that fear as a compass. So like every time you feel like, oh, maybe this is not something that I will excel at, try. Even if you fail, like what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? Like probably like 100 people will notice, and people anyway have like a very short attention span these days. Like people can barely concentrate on like reading a single article, let alone focus on your mistake. So try something. If you mess up and you fail, you at least know that that's not what you need to do, and you can continuously iterate.
I agree. The weight of other people's opinions on what you're doing that is still, no matter how much you try to take that out of your mind, it still is there to some extent. And especially like if you are in an exploratory phase, right? When you're trying out different things, even though you're trying out different things, you will be quitting, right? So through the outside world, it can look like, oh, you're shifting too much, or you can't make a decision about what you want to do. But what you're essentially doing is you're just trying out that thing and deciding initially itself, okay, I tried this out, I like it or I don't like it. So okay, that's a thing that I don't want to do, so that you can get closer to the goal of what you actually do want to do. So that's still progress for you, even though it looks like to the outside world that you're not making any progress at all.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure that, given the fact that you also come from that same background, right? You would have also felt this. We all try to block what other people are saying. And, even for those of us that have like a very thick skin, it does leave like, a bit of it leaves a mark in your psyche, right? Like, because you start to question whether you're doing the right thing. And it's very, very difficult to like kind of get yourself out of that rabbit hole, because once you start descending, then you keep descending.
Mhm.
And then, it kind of snowballs into like this thing where you start to question every single choice that you make, which is not healthy. So I think, I don't really have a solution for this other than the fact that just, don't be afraid of messing up. Like we all do. And I think one thing I've realized, like, looking at all these stories of successful people, and I mean, it might sound a little idealistic, but or really twisted depending on how you look at it, but I feel like once you actually achieve something, then everything that you do to get to that point is kind of then made to fit into the storyline where it was like a very well crafted thing and it all made sense and it was like a master stroke. And if you fail, well, like people will never know. So I don't think like it's that bad, right? If you look at it that way, then you don't really have anything to look.
Yeah, I think if you have just a small support system that can be your cheerleaders when you feel like that, that is something that really helps.
That's actually true. Yeah, yeah. And I think being able to like fall back on that support system, knowing that even if say the entire world is like telling you that you're making the wrong decision, but they're like, okay, you know what, you figure it out, we're with you. That's a huge thing.
Mhm.
Even for my parents, it's not like uh, they never supported me. They did question me, but I think once you win them over, and just like hearing them say that, okay, you know what, like we trust your judgment, just hearing those words is sometimes enough to kind of just spur you on and like make you do things.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So moving on, what advice would you have for somebody who is thinking of transitioning out of law and doing something else?
Oh my God. Okay. I don't know if I'm, fit to pass any kind of advice, because even right now, I feel like I'm also figuring stuff out. I mean, there are bigger things that I want to do in life, but I really don't know what the path to that particular thing is. And I always find like, people telling others how to approach a particular thing to be a little too preachy for my liking, because I don't think like, I mean, everyone's circumstances are different, right? It's not really possible to kind of take someone's blueprint and apply it. So I would actually, I think the only advice I would give, and I think this is something that has served me very, very well in both professional and personal fronts, is actually from a very unlikely source, which is Bruce Lee. So he has this very famous quote that I'm sure every one of your listeners has heard, which where he says that you should be like water and you should just like go with the flow. But I think a deeper thing that he said in one of his memoirs, or like he used to be sort of a philosopher too, which was the fact that you should never ever copy someone else's blueprint, because copying that blueprint will only take you further away from who you are intrinsically. And what you should always try to do is approach things with what the Buddhists and the people who practice the Zen philosophy call the beginner's mindset. And no matter what you come across, don't reject it, don't accept it wholeheartedly. Consume it, see what resonates with you, see what applies to you, and make a selective analysis of it and see what you want to absorb and what you want to reject. Because you are essentially like a niche of your own, right? And there is no other person that has that same sort of understanding of where you are at that particular point of time. So just keep learning, be open to opportunities that come your way. Before I went to DRDO, I actually wanted to get into like the venture capital industry, and I thought that, it was something that I would really, really enjoy. And during that time, like I could not find an inroad into it. But had I gone there and stuck myself to just the thought that I want to end up, in a VC role, I would not have gone to work with DRDO or Invest India, nor ended up in space tech, which is very funny because I'm really, really happy doing what I am doing right now. So be open to the possibility. And the other facet to that is just continuously learn, like stay upgraded and don't be afraid of like voicing yourself. So I think this is also one of the things that I think we as lawyers are taught, but that does not apply to other roles, is that we are always taught to be very, very self-critical, right? Like you check your own thoughts, and what ends up happening is that 99% of thoughts that you generate eventually end up getting rejected by your own mind, and
Mm.
you only use 1%. But that I don't think is fair. So you should be a little more aware about like what is going on in your head and try to not be excessively self-critical. There's a reason that your mind is concocting that idea. You might as well try it, and then, based on the kind of feedback that you get from around, like the people around you or the market around you, you try to figure out what you want to do. And the only other thing that I would suggest, and I think it's probably one of the ways that, you can be really, really happy, or at least like live a fulfilled life, is to just explore. Like, don't think that just because everyone from my batch is going on and like, their desire in life is to become a partner, I also want that. Don't get caught into something that you don't really want deep down inside. Because I think if you really think of, the wants and desires that we have, and you begin to strip them down to, let's say, parts that you want because you think society wants you to have it, and then another part where you want things because you really want to have it, that kind of gives you the kind of clarity that you need to make those transitions, or just like navigate uncertainties in life. Because once you realize that there, like, a certain amount of things are just things that you want because you're afraid of like judgment from other people, or you want to be perceived a certain way, I think it becomes a little slightly easier to kind of reject that and stay true to yourself.
All of that is like great advice. Like as you were saying it, like I was nodding my head like vigorously, which you can't see.
What advice do you think would you give, Kanika? I mean, I would say that your transition has also been equally out there or impressive. I really cannot think of any other lawyer that is now doing the kind of things that you do. So what kind of advice would you give?
My number one advice is actually similar to what you have said. It's essentially to figure out for yourself what it is that
Mm.
you would want, right? Because I think a lot of people do get into law, start working as a lawyer because these are the expectations that other people had from them, right? Okay, that it's a good degree, it's a professional life, and you're going to earn so much, that is why you should go ahead and do this. But people don't
Yeah.
really take out the time to think for themselves, okay, what it is that I would actually want to do. They look at other people, oh, somebody else is doing this, somebody else is a partner, or somebody else is doing consulting, so I should go ahead and do that. But unless and until you can actually figure out what is your value, what are your priorities, what are your interests, and really explore those, you're never going to find a career which you will be satisfied with. So that self exploration, I think, is extremely, extremely important. Right.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. And I think there's another thing. There used to be like this Austrian, I think, economist called Schumpeter, who, I mean, he mostly spoke about, how countries the world over innovate on products, and how you have an ecosystem that can continuously like churn out things that are pushing the boundary, where he said that innovation is essentially creative destruction. So I would say that if you really want to like find out who you are and like what you gravitate towards naturally, you should creatively destruct. What I mean by that, and I know it sounds very confusing, is that you try your hand at multiple things. Don't be afraid to imitate but innovate on it. and just see what sticks. That's it. I mean, I feel like a lot of times, what we look for, and I think I was also guilty of this to a large extent, when I was fresh out of law school or even during law school, was the fact that we tend to idolize people, and we tend to think that they have it all figured out. But I think once you reach a certain point, you realize that no one really has it all figured out, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone is just like floating around in the same boat, just probably with like different sensitivities and different preferences.
Mhm,
So, don't place anyone on a pedestal, whether it's a person or a title or, a particular goal,
mhm.
and just try to experiment with stuff. I think if more people experimented, things would be a lot more interesting.
So figure out what you want, learn, experiment, and don't be so self-critical of yourself.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I can give you like a very condensed version of this. So I used to play like
Mhm,
a lot of strategy games as a child, okay?
mhm.
And one of the facets of those strategy games used to be 4X, which essentially means that you explore, you expand, you exterminate, and what was the fourth for? And okay, I mean, like you can go look it up, but the idea is that you continuously, like, push the frontier of what you know and you expand your knowledge. You explore by going into different, streams of thought that you have. You exterminate what you don't think sticks with you or that you don't want to venture into. And then the fourth X I just remembered was exploit, which is once you figure out what your real calling is or what your niche is, you like double down on it and you exploit it to the maximum extent possible.
So that's a good framework to remember easily.
It's not mine. I stole it from a strategy game.
You shared the knowledge with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I think what you're doing is like wonderful because I wish that, when I started off, I had something like this. It would have really, really made my job a lot easier. And I think it would have made it a lot
Thank
less
you.
stressful also because now people can just like kind of go out there and like, find other people who've made choices that are just as unconventional. And I think a part of it is also you realizing that, oh, I'm not alone. Like, someone else
Yeah.
also did something just as wacky or as unpredictable. So, and that has a that brings a different kind of strength.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean that was the idea behind this also that you don't feel that you're the only one doing this, that other people have done this before. So, just to get some emotional strength and also some advice from people how to go about it.
Yeah, I kind of love that. And thank you for, having me on. I remember that during my time at Khaitan, I really wanted to work with you, but I feel like I already had like one of my feet out the door. But yeah, in like one of those parallel universes that you think of where infinite possibilities exist.
Mhm.
One of them would have that I would have liked to explore would have been like to work with you and learn from you because the limited number of deals that we worked on. There's one thing that I observed about you, which was the fact that you were not really as harsh as the others. So you were very, very forgiving when it came to, me making mistakes. And the other thing was that you didn't really mind teaching. You didn't mind passing your craft on or giving context about a particular thing, which I found really, really nice.
Thank you so much. It means a lot coming from a junior. And yeah, for the audience, I did not ask him to say all this.
Yeah, you didn't. I mean, come on. I'm just being honest.
No, thank you. Thank you so
I
much.
really am being honest.
Yeah, it was good working with you as well. Okay. Can you tell me what are your thoughts about what changes can be made in the legal profession for it to better support lawyers' well-being and mental
Oh my God. Okay. I think, I mean, for a question like that, I think we should have a separate.
health?
I think one thing that we can definitely change is it's unnecessarily stressful, for a lot of the juniors. And I think while I understand that a large part of it is the fact that a certain way of working has been perpetuated for a long, long time, I think people that are now in the decision making roles or like that are kind of like guiding the ship should make a conscious effort to break that cycle and make it more pleasant for people that are working under them, right? Because we hear so much about people working at law firms getting a heart attack at like an age that's barely 40 or committing suicide. That's really really horrendous to think about, right? And I think we have kind of contributed to that point where that pressure is just accepted as part and parcel of that work, which I don't think is necessary. And also realize that I think in 90% of the cases, right, it won't really matter if like your junior turns in the work tomorrow. You're not going to achieve anything by having him or her turn it by today 12 midnight, right? So like go a little easy. And I think one thing that I really appreciated for some of the seniors that did it, including you and at a lot of junctures, was that act as a foil. And I mean I can only say this for law firms because I've never worked with a litigator, which is toxic in its own right, I guess. But yeah, act as a foil. Like make sure that people under you don't feel that pressure. And I think if each level acts as a foil for the other one, then it gets incrementally more pleasant to function in.
So, Abhinav, it was really, really nice talking to you and catching up. And even though we did go a little bit more philosophical in this episode, I think that was really required.
Thank you so much, Kanika. It was lovely to be on this podcast and like speaking to you. And like I said, wonderful initiative.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the HMHL podcast. It's our hope that these stories and insights not only inspire you, but also empower you in your professional journey, whether within the legal field or beyond. Remember, change is a journey, and Happy Mind, Happy Lawyer is here to support you every step of the way. To learn more about our work and access our resources for your career transition, visit www.happymindhappylawyer.com or email us at contact@happymindhappylawyer.com. Don't forget to share this with someone who might find it useful and subscribe for more inspiring stories from ex-lawyers who've paved their paths to success. Remember, you have the power to redefine your career and find joy in your work. Until next time, I'm Kanika, wishing you clarity, courage, and a happy mind.